Thank you for having me along to Fire Buyer Live to present my presentation on investigations. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Peter Stone. I'm a full-time fire investigator working for a busy fire and rescue service. I'm in my 4th year as a fire investigator, and I have attained the level 5 Skills for Justice qualification, which is the nationally agreed qualification for fire investigators. My reports have been submitted to the Crown Prosecution Service and Coroner's Office, and I have delivered my conclusions in both Crown Court and Coroner's Court. So, why do we do investigations? The simple answer is to find out what has happened. It doesn't have to be a fire, it could be anything, but something has happened and we want to find out what has happened. Within my specific role as a fire investigator, my role is to identify the origin of the fire and, where possible, the cause of the fire. But what's the purpose of this? The purpose is to be able to understand why something has happened, and ultimately to do what we can to prevent it happening again or limit the impact of a similar event. It's quite a wordy way of saying that if we find out why something started, we can educate people and we can help them prevent fires happening in the future or other events. So what is the purpose of an investigation? Any investigation, not just fire investigations, but any investigation. For me, the term investigation can mean different things depending on the circumstances. However, in my opinion, every investigation needs to remain objective throughout the entirety of it. The outcome is never or should never be predetermined. The facts and evidence will tell you what the conclusion is. Do not go looking for answers to something that you think you know. So I'll start this slide again. What is the purpose of any investigation? The term investigation can mean different things depending on the circumstances. However, for me, every investigation needs to remain objective throughout. The findings of any investigation should be robust enough to stand up to scrutiny. The facts and the evidence are what they are and will help you determine your conclusions. So how do I conduct my investigations? Well, my investigations have to be scrutinised at, as I've already mentioned before, different courts within the land, also within the civil law, and my investigations have to stand up to scrutiny with regard to questioning of my process, my findings, and the way that I do this. In fact, the fire investigators within the UK, we follow a methodology that is called the scientific method. The scientific method adopts a 7-stage process that moves through the investigation, ensuring that everything is catalogued and recorded and auditable at some point. The first stage is recognise the need. What has happened and what do we need to do about it? That will get the right resources there. It will ensure that the right people are notified early on, and an investigation can take place at an arranged time. Define the problem. So what is the problem? What do we need to find out? What are the questions that need answering? In a fire investigation scene, simply it is, where did the fire start and how did the fire start? Sometimes it's very obvious and wouldn't need a full fire investigation, and other times it's more complex. For example, a significantly burnt property where a lot of the evidence has been consumed by fire. Third stage is gathering data. Now, data isn't exactly just documentary evidence. It is everything that you are able to get information from at a scene. The data can mean witness accounts. It can mean the actual scene itself. It can mean CCTV footage, pictures, photographs, documentary evidence, anything that actually helps you process that scene is all valuable data and should all be recovered. Once you've gathered all of this data, you need to consider what the data is telling you. And that's why it's important to get all of the information that's available, because if you don't, you may overlook very prominent points which could change the outcome of your investigation. Following on from this, you should develop hypotheses, a number of possible outcomes that may have caused the incident. You should develop as many possible hypotheses and then discount them one at a time, if possible, evidentially. Don't be tempted to say, well, I don't think that one's that likely, so I'm not really gonna use it. For me, you evidentially discount it. Not, I don't think it has. You can say with absolute conviction, that's why that hasn't caused that, and then work through your hypotheses in that way. By doing that, you are testing your hypotheses, and as I say, you're discounting them as you go. An example of this could be a fire in a domestic property, significantly burnt area, with evidence of an electrical vehicle being involved in the fire. Now, to default to the electrical batteries just because they are in the news would be a mistake, especially as that may overlook the possibility for other things like deliberate fire setting, accidental fires, etc. So it's very important to make sure that those hypotheses are significantly tested to ensure that under scrutiny they will stand up as evidentially discounted or evidentially included. And finally, based on that process, you should be able to make a final conclusion of your hypothesis. Now, this isn't always possible to single it down to one cause at the time. There may be a number of different causes, potential causes, that you cannot evidentially discount. You have to consider them, but if you can't evidentially discount them, you should consider them as a possible ignition source, which means if you have multiple potential causes, that would be determined as undetermined. So on most occasions, we do get a conclusion, a single conclusion of most likely, but sometimes it's not always possible. Now, moving on to how we record the scene. Personally, I create a casebook for each incident and make notes, handwritten notes. And the reason I use this method over different methods is to make sure that my evidence, my information, that is all available to the courts should they require it, that is a contemporaneous note that is made at or near the time of the investigation, therefore it is evidentially robust and serves the purpose of the Criminal Procedure Act's rules. So my written contemporaneous notes are in a bespoke book. Every single one of my investigations has its own book. Different organisations use different methods. Some people free write on a notepad. Some people use dictaphones. I don't. I use written contemporaneous notes. That way I can do any drawings. And every time that someone interjects with more information, I can write that in, timestamp it, and not forget any information. That works for me. I'm not saying that's what everyone must do. That's what works for me. We can always record the scene as well, depending on the incident. If the police are involved, it will be the crime scene investigators that recover the scene via video, obtaining CCTV footage, mobile phone information, but they will also take photographs to record the scene photographically, and then that will help me when I compile a report. Every fire investigator within the UK, following the approved method under the Skills for Justice Level 5, will conduct an investigation methodically and record it as such. Your first part of the investigation should be initial external examination, which gives you an overall orientation of the property and highlights any obvious areas that you want to look at in more detail later on. That is then followed by a initial internal, which does exactly the same, gives you a broad layout of the property and allows you to start making some sort of idea of where you want to start your investigation. This is followed by a detailed external investigation, which identifies in detail evidence to the outside of the property, and that's not just recoverable evidence. That's in relation to broken windows, fire patterns, smoke damage, soot travel, other areas that have been damaged, access to the property, escape routes from the property. It also identifies the security of a property, so you can make certain determinations or inferences based on that initial information. And if there is anything outside that needs to be considered with regard to a window that's broken potentially before the fire started, which could be significant, that needs to be photographed and captured in your notes as well. Once the outside is processed, we'll move to a detailed internal examination, which works from, it's almost counterintuitive with regard to how you would look for something. So in a house fire, it would be quite obvious, or it would seem quite obvious, that the fire had started in a certain area. However, from a fire investigation perspective, you start from the areas or area that is least damaged by fire. And the reason for that is, starting from the area least damaged by heat, smoke and flame, you can work your way back to the area most damaged. And as you are progressing from the least to most, you can identify things and you can discount them quite early on. For example, a gas boiler is in a property, but it's within a cupboard. Therefore, you have considered the gas boiler as a potential cause, but it's not damaged and therefore is not the cause. You have evidentially discounted that at that time as a viable cause for ignition. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this rule, in so much as if a fire starts in a certain area and moves to an area that is holding more fuel, more available fuel. For example, a lot of newspapers are in a room. Now that room may present initially as the area of origin due to the amount of damage, but that's not always the case, and it's always worthwhile taking the extra time to acknowledge the fuel packages within that area, acknowledge the airflow, which obviously has a massive impact within how a fire develops, and just assess the scene in its absolute entirety. Once we've done all the sort of narrowing down to the area of origin, or potentially room of origin if it's within a property, we have to then consider the causes, the possible causes within that compartment. And I'm not talking about deliberate, accidental, I'm talking about the actual physical causes. So could it be an electrical appliance? Could it be the electrical wiring? Could it be a gas appliance, a gas heater that has been used to dry clothes? Is there any evidence of that? Very prominent theme that's happening nationwide is the prolific use of battery operated equipment, for example, e-vehicles, computers, phones, etc. Now those batteries, once involved in fire, will react violently, and therefore the end product is a significantly damaged battery from a point of what may be the origin, but that's not always the case, because they react exactly the same or very similar if they have been involved in the fire or were the cause of the fire. So you have to carefully consider all of those options. There's always smoking, which is a common historic theme. There's cooking, and then there's always the potential for the introduction of a naked flame to combustible materials. So those are all the things you should consider at every incident, because you could be challenged quite easily, and if you have not recorded that, it is where you will get challenged by a opposing expert who will say you haven't written anywhere that you considered that, therefore you did not consider it, and it's a point of unnecessary vulnerability. So just make sure you do the work, you consider everything, and you evidentially discount it. So my team are now looking at doing things slightly differently. To do an investigation, you can be overwhelmed with a massive amount of information, and therefore I'm trialing a process where we have one investigator doing the physical scene examination and another investigator gathering all the wider information. Once the physical examination has been completed, the hypotheses, however many there are, have been developed from the physical examination, and they will be tested against all of the wider information. And then when challenged, the investigation team can confirm that was an unbiased investigation, and all findings were tested fully against the information available. And if you follow this process, just make sure that you follow all of your information, you write it down, your decision logs, and you make sure that that's recorded in your casebook. Arguably, it is as important to evidentially discount causes as it is to evidentially include them. So that's all from me. Again, I'd like to thank you for having me along today, and I hope you've found that the information I've given you of use. Thank you.
Hi, Peter. It's great to have you here at Fire by Live. I just had a couple of questions that I wanted to run through with you about your presentation on fire investigations. So what do you think is the biggest challenge when it comes to fire investigating?
One of the biggest challenges potentially is remaining unbiased during your investigation. It's very easy to be led into a certain narrative based on people telling you what's happened. Someone always knows what's happened, even if they weren't there. So just being very careful to consider everything and work through that process. I know it's not a physical activity, but that's probably the most challenging for me.
Never as easy as they make it look on the TV.
Well, it's nowhere near like you get on CSI Miami for a start.
So there is currently a bit of a skill gap in the industry, which is being spoken about a lot. For those watching who may be interested in a career in fire investigating, how might they go about doing this?
Now, there are different options to get into fire investigating. Personally, I started within the fire service. I've got 2 decades experience within the fire service. I was promoted up to a point where I was eligible to move into fire investigation. So my journey has been very fire service orientated. There are courses out there, different training providers, different universities do degrees in fire investigation, and there are other websites that can get people to learn how to sort of get into it. For me, it's quite difficult for the private sector to sort of branch into it unless they have some forensic capabilities or other information. But the courses are there to give you that qualification to move into it.
And as a veteran firefighter, you must have come into the position with a lot of experience and knowledge already of fires. So it's always something that's quite helpful and quite a good career route to go into. You mentioned that fire investigating not only helps identify the cause of fires, but also helps to prevent fires in the future. So how can we start to educate people, particularly the public, around this type of fire safety?
So the main thing about being able to develop an appropriate prevention strategy is, first off, getting evidentially based conclusions of fires. You have things like the fires that hit the headlines, like battery fires or cost of living crisis, which are all factors. However, the conclusions need to be evidentially driven, and when we have accurate data to support a prevention strategy, then we are getting the right message out to the right people in the communities.
And lastly, you spoke about how your team is trying to change the process of fire investigating, whether that be, using multiple investigators, for example. But are there any particular technologies that can be adopted to help improve fire investigating for the future, or at least training?
That is a good question. There are industries now within not just fire investigation, but within the fire service that are sort of moving into different types of training. There are virtual reality training types that are really good to be used to complement current training. There are devices that can do gas analysis within the scene, and those are always useful to identify areas that need a sample to be taken. And also there are other things such as improved, it's not a technology, but it's improved practices to make sure that when we are in a scene, we don't compromise any of the evidence within there. So that's more process with regard to the criminal justice system. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and a lot of it is not fully embedded, but it's slowly coming in.
So it's definitely a more collaborative approach, I suppose, between technology and process, like you said. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us and giving such an educational presentation, Peter. We really appreciate your time here. If anybody else has any further questions, please do reach out to Peter directly. Thank you.